Further ado, we've got a terrific keynote here. Angus, who said to me initially, I don't know a damn thing about hemp, but I'm excited about the economy of Alberta, so come excite us about the economy of Alberta, Angus. Angus what?
And I still don't. But I have read a lot about it, and it's interesting from the standpoint. I was saying to somebody, it reminds me of canola about 25 years ago, and the opportunity that's in front of you. I don't have a lot of time this morning because there's so much I'd like to tell you and share with you as we go through everything. It's a very interesting time. As a matter of fact, as far as I've been in the business over 40 years, and I don't think there's a time that's more complicated. Sometimes they can be worse, and sometimes they can be better. But I don't remember a time where it's more complicated than it is where we are right now in front of us. Any lawyers? Good, okay. One of the things I will want to say is that, being out here in Alberta, being here in Edmonton, is that myself and our team, we were recognized by the Globe and Mail as one of the top 150 advisors out of 12,000. And if I don't tell you, you'll never know. So I just thought I'd share that with you. And we've won some others. Today, we're going to start off quickly with the pandemic. Then we're going to talk about the Russian-Ukrainian war, talk about inflation, which is here, talk about employment, immigration, real estate, and Alberta. And we'll come back. Remember the days we used to talk about the Alberta advantage? Well, it's here. We just don't know it. And we're not talking about it. And we need to look ourselves in the mirror and remember that. So let's take a look at the pandemic. The most important thing I want you to know about the pandemic is that we're getting through it, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And the most important part of that is we're not filling up the hospitals in intensive care, and people aren't dying. People are going to die, but they're not dying in the same way we were 2 years ago. And therefore, as far as the global economy, yes, you can have areas that shut down, but keep in mind in China, the vaccines they're using are not good vaccines as we are in the rest of the world. And that's part of the problem that they have, but they have been shutting themselves down. The other thing to keep in mind, if you want a copy of the slide presentation today, just send us an email and we'll send it right back to you. No problem at all. When you take a look at we've just gone through a pandemic, we haven't gone through a recession. And that's really important because when you go through a recession, you don't have money in your pocket. When you go through a pandemic, the governments, especially our governments, have given you a lot of money in your pockets. And if you take a look at the fiscal stimulus that we've had in Canada, we rank third as far as the percentage of GDP so we've been very generous from that aspect to it. Third most generous country in the world. When we take a look at disposable income, this is scary from the standpoint is a lot of people have received a lot of money for things that they didn't do, and it looks like they spent it. Like my daughter. But, and that's important because MNP came out with a report the other day saying 31% of the population can't pay all their monthly bills, and 60% of the people in Canada today are within $200 of not paying all their monthly bills. So we're back to where we were before. This is not new territory for us. We seem to be very comfortable in living this way. But one of the things to keep in mind, we have not gone through a recession. We went through a pandemic, and it's very different. When we take a look as well in this pandemic, two things have occurred. You've got a new group of haves and have-nots. So the people that have real estate and stocks have done very well over the last 2 or 3 years. If you don't have real estate and stocks, you're a have-not. Okay, so that means the average worker out there that if he doesn't own a home or she doesn't own a home or they don't own a home, that they're behind the curve versus those that do or those that have their stock portfolio. So we take a look at inflation. This is important from the standpoint, when we've gone through the pandemic, is that we had the supply disruptions. What happened is we drew down on the inventories. I got a friend, and he's got a huge inventory today of some parts, and he's missing a huge number of other parts. And he always says, I'll take the parts that are going to deliver to me because I don't want to come at the bottom of the list for the next time. So it's interesting is that if we're just going through a normal cycle and we didn't have the challenges with the pandemic today going forward, if we were through the tunnel, if we didn't have the war in Ukraine with the disruptions there, is that we would be looking to rebuild our inventories over the next 2 or 3 years. Then we take a look at China, coming back to the pandemic.
because they haven't vaccinated their population and or they've done it with a very poor vaccine, is that they've been able to they have shut down large parts of their country. And when they do that, the Chinese economy continues to slow down, slow down, slow down. And that's important because that's the second largest economy in the world. So they're looking at slowing down, and that's going to slow down the global economy. Then we take a look at Ukraine from the aspect of the impact of inflation. Now, I've just taken a slice because I'm making the assumption you all have an agricultural background here. But if you take a look at the Ukraine, they're the most arable land in Europe. That's number one. Basically, the Ukraine is Canada, which had 46 million people in it. Okay, maybe not quite as large as Canada, but it's agricultural and it's mineral rich and natural gas rich. And it's the world's number one in sunflower and sunflower oil exports, the second largest producer of barley, third largest producer in corn, and the biggest grower of potatoes. Now, that could be in the EU, and same with rye. But they are very agricultural based. And if I was to suggest to you that if we're talking about energy prices, and remember, energy is the industry that people love to hate today. And that's the problem that we have with the energy world today and the investments. That's why the stocks are trading at values still substantially below they were, decades ago, especially on a multiple basis, because people hate the oil and gas industry, because that's what they've been taught on a go-forward basis. And so every time there's an opportunity for them to sell off, they do. They don't hate farmers, though. That's the good news, eh? You can be loved. This is the most interesting question, not the most, but a very interesting question. When you take a look at Ukraine today, are the farmers going to be able to plant their fields? My guess is yes. Will it have fertilizer? Maybe. We all know it's doubled and tripled in price. But the bottom line, if they didn't have it a few months ago, or 4, 5, 6 months ago, they don't have it today. The second question is, what's going to happen with Mother Nature during the summertime as far as rain and hail and heat waves? And the third one is, will they have the fuel to take their crops off? And then when they take the crops off, they put them in the bins. Fine if they do. And then how do they get them to market? Because you know what? The logistics are going to be totally disrupted. And so if they do get them off, they'll probably be stuck in their bins. I wouldn't be surprised if not just then stuck in the fields from that aspect to it. And I think this is the biggest shortage, and it's out there right in front of us right now, and we're just not aware of it or not taking it into account, the logistics problems of it. As far as China goes, remember China's the second largest economy, is that we're looking at food imports. They've been huge in importing it. So China will not run out of food in 2022 or probably in 2023. If the world starts running shy of food, they'll be running shy of food in 2024 because they already have 60% of the rice reserves, 51% of the wheat reserves, and 69% of the corn reserves. So maybe we'll be eating Chinese beef. That was a joke, okay? Come on, work with me here. Okay, now, when we went through the Olympics and just before the Olympics, we were all watching China and Russia get together and have a big love-in and say, you're good, you're pretty, I'm handsome, I've got gray hair, you got gray hair. Oh, you're bald, don't worry about it. But when you take a look at China today and understand where they are in the world today as far as trading goes, the tensions are going to be mounting because once Russia invaded the Ukraine, the expectation was it would be over by the end of the weekend. That hasn't occurred. And then when you take a look at what's happening in China, I'm trying to see where I have this aspect to it, but the largest trading partner of the Chinese is the EU. It's not Russia. The second largest trading partner is the United States. Russia was 12th, and today, if we went on dollars amount, is probably about 30th, okay? So Russia isn't important on a trade aspect to it, and remember, the Chinese economy continues to slow, so won't you want to be increasing your exports? And the answer to the question is obviously yes, and therefore you need to keep friends in a friendly way with the EU. You don't want to have sanctions against yourself, and the same with the United States. So when we take a look at the energy surplus and the bottleneck there, obviously, we all know that Europe's very vulnerable as we go forward. This is something else I want you to keep in mind. You know, Quebec has a huge advantage, and BC because they have a lot, and Manitoba because of a lot of hydropower. Okay, but with the lack of rain, the reservoirs are shrinking, right? And especially if you go down to California. In Canada, we have a surplus in Alberta of natural gas, which is also very inexpensive most of the time. We certainly have it here. And from the standpoint of power, it's going to be versus international prices of natural gas, we've got a huge advantage right here in our backyard. So let's take a look. On China-Russia dilemma, here's the numbers here, we go through this, is that in 2021, China's trade with Russia was $147 billion. It's a big number to us. But compared to $828 billion and $756 billion with the EU and the United States, right? So I don't see China trying to make too many ruffles, especially when they're trying to expand their economy, when they need to do that, especially with the COVID challenges they have. Otherwise, they'll have political disruptions. I think the most important thing for us here in Canada and Alberta is to understand the importance of immigration. And believe it or not, we've done a fantastic job on immigration over the years. And that's why if we take a look at the population of Alberta today being 4.4 million people, if you asked me 7 years ago and you say we're going to have an NDP government and we're going to have the price of oil go from $90 down to $50, what do you think the population is going to be, Angus, when it's 3.7 million? I would politely say maybe 3.6, not 4.4 million. And that's because of the immigration that's taken place. So Canada, our target right now is to immigrate 400 to 500,000 new Canadians into Canada as a country, right? The average immigrant that we're bringing over is highly skilled and 7 years younger. And he or she either has a new family or is getting ready to start a new family in that point in their life. Most of them go to Toronto, and we'll see this in a few minutes. And one of the reasons they go there is because from their perspective, and I've checked this many times, Toronto on a global basis is the 8th safest large city in the world. And sometimes I've seen it at 7. So our immigration has been based on needs, okay? Needs versus humanitarian reasons. So we don't have people landing on the shorelines in boats and floating there. We have people that we're bringing in through a system. And sometimes that system seems very bureaucratic, right? But what it does do, it means we're bringing in the ones that are young, well-educated, and wanting to work, not the people that are running from somewhere else. And that's important when you look at the fabrication. And it's interesting, when you take a look then of Toronto, is that in the labor force, if you're in downtown Toronto, every other person in downtown Toronto was born outside of Canada. And almost every other person in Vancouver was born outside of Canada. So that's how important immigration has been to us here in Canada. Then we take a look at the strongest population growth in the world. Canada is the one that's circled. And we take a look at the migration and natural birth. And outside of Mexico, which has a huge natural birth, you see the birth rates on these countries are really very low. We'll come to that in a minute. That's why immigration is so important to us. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at Japan and Germany and Poland and other countries such as Greece and Czechoslovakia and Italy, is that the birth rate's actually negative. So if you didn't have immigration, that's why if you went back to Angela Merkel a few years ago, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, she says, we need these people. Even if the country in Germany didn't want them, she says, we need them. And you take a look, foreign-born population is well-educated. So we've done a superb job from that aspect to it. Now, I love these next couple of charts. If you take out the soft gray, that's the immigration. And if you take off our growth in this country would be much, much smaller, okay? The circle is the natural birth rate in Ontario. So you can see Toronto prices would be probably half. If they didn't have immigration, maybe even 40% of what they are today. And take a look at the red. That means people in Ontario are actually leaving Ontario to other provinces, okay? So it's the immigration that keeps on driving Canada as a driving force as we go forward. We take a look at Alberta. Because we have young families, young people, our birth rate is better than most provinces. The only one that's different, that's stronger, would be Quebec. Okay? And I would suggest to you, because they've had daycare, where the province has been paying for it, is that the families then can support it as we go forward. But even in Alberta, once again, if you go back with the price of oil dropping for the last 5-6 years, we've losing people from this province moving to other provinces. And the only reason our province continues to grow is because of immigration. But our birth rate is much stronger than most of the provinces. Take a look at British Columbia. Do you see the birth rate in British Columbia? There isn't one. Right? You get as many people dying as you have being born. So just think what that's going to do to your municipal taxes down the road and who's going to be paying the bill. And you know what BC stands for, right? Bring cash. And it's going to be the BC in the future. Like very much. Bring a lot of cash. Okay, anyways. The other thing, though, you got a lot of people from Alberta moving to British Columbia and other parts of the province. And it's interesting because the Maritimes isn't much different than this when you take a look at it, because they're actually in negative growth, and they have people moving from other parts of the provinces because of inexpensive housing, moving into the Maritimes. And you've got people that used to live in Newfoundland and the Maritimes that moved out to Alberta that have moved back. Okay. In 2007, the world's population surpassed the rural. So that was the tipping point for more people living in the country versus the city. Now we've got about 80% of the people in the world live in cities. And in major cities, you don't have a birth rate usually larger than 1. Interesting, when you need 2.1 to stay the same size. So effectively, like China's going to have some problems because they've got these new major cities they've got to fill, and they don't have a population birth rate as a country much more than 1.2, okay? And so the question is, these cities are going to become more vacant if they don't have the population or bringing people into it. It's a challenge. The population in China is expected to peak in 2028, 2030 at the latest, and my guess would be 2027, if I got the years right. We all know that the United States is the largest economy in the world, correct? In 2021, their population expanded as number of people in the world by 0.1%. Okay, so they added 392,000 people, 665. That's a smaller increase than the Spanish flu and World War I. And it's the first time since 1937 that it expanded by less than 1 million people. How is the world's largest economy not expanding as far as population goes, and it's going to be maintained there? So when you take a look at inflation, it's some interesting longer-term questions. And the other thing, you got 850,000 Americans that have died over COVID. But that's over the last couple of years. If you ask me, I think not the cell phone, not the computer, I think the greatest invention that's had the dramatic impact on our global planet is actually the birth control pill. All right? Because ever since we had the birth control pill, the families are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And see it happens. And I will tell you that in COVID, it's only going to add to this problem, because how do you meet people? And as real estate prices have moved higher and homes have become more expensive, why do you stay there? So let's take a look at real estate. We're going to go through this very quickly. The average income in Toronto that you need to qualify is $205,000. You have to earn $205,000 for over 330 months. So you got to work for a long time to get up to that amount of money. See it happens. When you go to Vancouver, you have to work 432 months and earning in excess of $267,000 to afford a house in Vancouver. When you go to Calgary, you only have to earn $105,000 and for 36 months. Where would you rather live? But you know what? Here's the bargain. Edmonton, $88,000 for 30 months. Wouldn't you rather live in Edmonton? If you're a young person today, we're not telling them this. Yeah, I know I want to live in Edmonton. All right, so when we take a look at Alberta, and we take a look at some of the stats, believe it or not, we're the highest paid on average, our families, the highest paid per individual in Canada as a province goes. So we have the income, $1,200 on a weekly basis. Canada's just under $1,100, and Ontario, with those high real estate prices, are $1,126. You wonder how long that real estate leverage can last. Then you take a look at the business activity. We're starting to surge here in Alberta. We know it, we feel it, we just don't talk about it. We don't share it with people. Then when we take a look at the Alberta Advantage, when I came out here 45 years ago, we knew about the Alberta Advantage. We had the gumption, the balls, the courage, and the attitude that we were Albertans. Nobody was going to tell us what to do. All right? You take a look at it. So today, what do we have? Affordable housing. We have transportation. We don't have to take 2 hours to commute. You know, in Toronto, they say you got to move out of the city as far until you qualify. You qualify to get a condo, you qualify to get a house. You can buy a house right here in Edmonton. You can buy a house right here in Calgary. We have higher earnings. We have lower taxes. We have no retail sales tax, right? We got high personal exemptions versus the other provinces. We have a young population. We're second in Canada, but it's to Manitoba, right? So we've got, if you're a retailer, this is a great spot to be from that aspect to it, because this is the age of consumerism. We've got a great population size between 15 and 45, 42.3%, the highest in Canada. We have a skilled workforce. We've always had a skilled workforce, right? We've got lower corporate tax rates, affordable commercial and industrial real estate, strong railway networks. We're talking about in Vegreville, they're going to put in a new rail line there for their new announcements. Congratulations. And we've got global stability. Somebody was talking about people don't realize that businesses from Europe are looking for a place to do business, such as Canada, such as Alberta, such as Edmonton, because we're always here. We're always can be counted on. And that's an important part. We take it for granted. So I will want you to know that the Alberta Advantage is back. And if you have any questions or you need a copy of this, that's where to go. Thank you very much. I guess we have time for a question? Yeah, we do? Okay. We have time for a few questions. Yes, sir.
Great presentation, Angus. Just curious, you said the pandemic wasn't the recession. What's your thoughts on what is the recession?
Well, I'm saying, okay, it wasn't, it's not, yeah. So the recession is when the price of oil is, for us, at zero, and nobody wants it, or the price of grains and nobody wants our beef, or we have a recession when we have a disease in our cows, or some disease in our wheat. We have a recession when unemployment is at 20%. Unemployment, we've got more people working in Canada today than we did before the pandemic started. And I'm talking about Canada, right? And so you don't have a recession when you have full employment. Okay? Yes, sir.
Just was curious if you got any forecast with regards to the price of oil.
Well, I think yesterday the governor of the Bank of Canada and the chair of the Federal Reserve and some of the other governors of the Federal Reserve are adamant that they're going to bring down inflation. Their target is 2%. And if we went back to the peak in oil was about 6 weeks ago on a Sunday night in Asia at $130, open in New York at $125. I'm not sure where it is this morning, but we'll say it's $103. We were thinking that Russia was going to be absolutely stopped, they wouldn't be able to export their oil. And the free world basically is not importing the oil from Russia, but China is and India is. And they'll tell you, with our situation, with the population we have, we cannot afford not to take oil at a $30 discount. And therefore, we're not short 4.6 million barrels a day. We're really only short 1.5 million barrels a day. And that's when China slows down, their demand slows down with their population growth and everything that's happening in GDP, that all by itself offsets it. And in the meantime, the activity in the U.S., they're now exporting over 10 million, almost 11 million barrels a day. So that's up 1.2 just from there. Oil's always going to fluctuate, from country to country, place to place. So generally speaking, I think we've probably seen a peak in the price of oil. And you know that you've got the strategic reserves that are being allowed out, and that's 1 million to 2 million barrels a day. So is it possible the global economy strengthens? Yes. But it's probably not going to strengthen until we have more clarity what's going to happen in the Ukraine war. So, and at that point, the big question is, if there is peace, which we'd all hope was like 6 weeks ago, what happens to the sanctions against Russia, because the EU needs that oil and needs that natural gas? Is it like your favorite son that you say, I said to my son once after I grounded him one more time,
He said, Dad, he was about 12, if you don't enforce the rules, there are no rules. Right? So I'm not sure what's going to happen with the sanctions. So it's hard to imagine that fuel, energy, is going to be going much higher from where it is today. Okay? It doesn't mean it's going to go lower. Food prices will be the disruption for the summer. Yes, sir. Perry.
For years, we've talked about the volatility of Alberta's economy and the need for diversification. Have we made any headway?
No. And that's why it's so important. You know, I go out to every communities to talk about their local communities and the businesses that are there. I know we have people in this province, in this city, that are trying to diversify the economy, and we just need to do a better job at it. And have we made progress? I'm sure we've made some progress, okay, but we haven't made the leaps and bounds that we always talk about and we desire to get to. But what we have to do is change our mindset, that we can do this, and we will do this. If you were all university students, the biggest challenge I would suggest to you today is that you don't know the questions to ask. You don't have the experience that we have in the room. And so you have to have that experience so that you can get up there. We were talking about this earlier, and you're going to talk about it next, right? So it's important that we share some of the experiences that we have, and we can get going further. Because my point to you is that we've got the manpower, we got the brains, we can find the money. You heard that yesterday. We just need the mindset to be in this room and do it. One last question, right? Perry, or you got two? I got two questions. Okay, you're second.
Just a couple of questions on, it's around the attractiveness of Alberta as a place to live. Yes, housing prices are lower. There's actually excess, more jobs than people across Canada. So getting a job isn't really the issue. Somewhat concerning to me was reading recently, younger professionals are actually moving out of Alberta more than in. And they've indicated that culture is important. The kind of community I wish to live in, the kinds of social expectations around that. And that's a soft issue that doesn't just come up in numbers. But I'm wondering how does Alberta address that over time? When we moved head offices out of Montreal years ago to Calgary, a big part of that was featuring the arts, featuring a progressive culture that would break down the barriers for people to move from Montreal to Calgary. I think there's a question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right, the question is, how do we brand ourselves to be better? And number one, 45 years ago, I came from Toronto. Everybody hated people from Toronto. All they're going to do is take the beautiful women and go back. I took a beautiful woman, but I stayed, okay? And so you should love me. But part of that today is the oil and gas industry. They say, I don't want a job in the oil and gas industry because it's the industry that they love to hate. We can't fix that ourselves. We can say all the great things we're doing and the diversification and how much greener we are and the strides that we're making. 40 years ago, and we had it 50, 60 years ago in Ontario, our doctors were leaving because they're going to get paid more money down south of the border. A lot of those people have come back. And I go back to the questions. We don't know the questions to ask when we're young. And the question is, when you ask you young, you go to Toronto, you go to Vancouver, you go somewhere, and you got to work forever to buy a house. Or you could buy a house here. The interesting question is, why would you buy a house? You buy a house so you have a family. So where do you want to raise your family? And those are some of the values that we have. And I want you to know, now that the Oilers are winning, we have a lot to offer. We just have to get our football club going. But, we got the Wind Spear, right? We got the Jubilee Auditorium. We've got the Citadel Theatre. When it comes to art, we're doing just fine. The question is, there are other questions. That's important when we're trying to bring somebody from somewhere else in the world and say, hey, do you have these type of facilities? And if you went to the university, they'll take you all to the different aspects and show you all the different things we have in arts. And we got more than Calgary, okay? And Calgary's the one value that Calgary has today is that they got a lot of open office space. So rent's very cheap.
But keep this in mind, that office space is 45 years old to 50 years old, and the life expectancy in those buildings are 40 years. You think, oh, yeah, interesting. So there are going to be some costs going forward on that aspect to it. But we've got a great opportunity. Who had the other question? Yes. Well, it's quite simple. How many people think that fertilizer prices are really cheap today? But maybe they are. Right? How many people think they've got enough fertilizer? And people say, I can't believe you're paying the transportation costs that you are. They can pass them through. And my question is, do you want the product or not? Okay, you win. So, and if we don't have the arable lands to plant and harvest and get delivered, it's a challenge. We've seen it here, right, with our beef and pork and chickens and everything else. When something goes wrong, it's a huge problem. And when this happens globally, and the EU is one of that aspects to it, it's a problem. So why are the commodities as high as they are today? It's a problem. And there isn't one farmer in here that tells me that they're making an extraordinary amount of money because of higher commodity prices. Is there? I don't think so. All right, somebody, you had a, yes, sir.
Yeah, you get back to touching on it. I'm wondering, are we done with the era of $7 wheat or $10 canola? You know, we met that supply-demand balance for feeding a hungry world where, you know, farmers may have some control over it when it comes to commodities.
No. Okay. I say that because it's commodities. Remember last year, you know, a lumber truck that used to be worth a value of around $12,000, $14,000 when it was traveling down Highway 2 there, it was worth $100,000. Well, it's not worth $100,000 today. Commodities, and you know, if the world gets smaller, this is the interesting aspect to it. We start to eat different. The best way to fix inflation is what? Inflation, right? Because of the price of oil, you substitute, you reduce, you do different things. You don't, you know, airline tickets, they say, are going up 7% per month right now because of fuel costs. But they're also lacking pilots, which is scary when you think about it, right? But just, hey, who's flying the plane? The stewardess in the back. No, I honestly don't. But I will tell you, usually the peak in wheat commodity prices, grain prices are usually like in the next 2 or 3 months, right? Before the harvest. And last question.
I promise it. Janet Jacobs, Town of Bearthorpe. I have 4 things here, but I'll bundle. Everything's better in a bundle. First of all, provincial politics. Do we have a UCP government next time, or are we back to NDP? So I'll leave you to think about that one. You mentioned a sales tax. Is it time for Alberta to have a sales tax? 1 or 2% is billions of dollars in the provincial coffers. Also, greener energy. Is there one that's a forerunner? Is it solar? Is it hydrogen? Is it, what is it? And there's been a lot of talk about Edmonton and Calgary. Don't forget rural Alberta. We're out there playing in the field too.
So do you need an hour to answer those?
No, I don't. I won't forget about Marathorpe and the rural Alberta. And we've got a gentleman from Olds. And every community is a gem, especially when you orbit a city such as Edmonton or Red Deer or Calgary. Is that other city? I would be really disappointed if we have to get a new leader, because one of the things we need is stability. I'm not saying we're not going to get a new leader, and I think the UCP will win the next election. It may not feel and seem like it today, but I think we're not. I just think that's my thought. What was the other question? No, sales tax. That's what I'm trying to say to you. We have to make sure we don't have a sales tax. We have to make sure we have lower corporate taxes than everybody else. We have to make sure that your personal taxes are competitive. We need to embrace the Alberta advantage, and people will come here because we've got that stability, and hydrogen would be the answer to your last question. Thank you very much.
This was superb, but I feel compelled, in light of the last question, to ask you, have you ever thought of running for politics, getting involved in politics?
I'm happily married.
I think I heard Stephen Harper say the same thing. I want to thank you very, very much, but I do have one last question for you. In a conversation last night over dinner, we were just talking about the socio-demographics of youth and aging, and how youth are very utopian. They look to government. They think government handouts are the way of life. But as they age and begin to accumulate assets, their perspective begins to change from, even though that's a red tie, to blue. Do you want to comment at all about the changing socio-demographics and the influence that may have on politics in Alberta?
That's a really tough question, because where I'd like to answer it is probably not the reality of life. I think our young people today are being educated in a socialist way, and I say that from the standpoint is we don't have enough financial literacy in our schools. They don't know what it is to create a budget, and it's a real problem. And I know our Minister of Education understands that to be a problem today. Listen, when I was 19, going on 21, 24, I was really smart. I'm a lot smarter today. And I will tell you, from a standpoint of financial planning, you don't think about your retirement until you're 49 to 52. You put your money in the RSPs, but you just bury it and forget about it, right? And I think if our families, if our young citizens aren't thinking of having a family, they're not looking to buy a house. If they don't have a house, they don't have all the understanding of the expenses of the house, getting the lawn and the work and the effort that it takes to keep your lawn in good shape and your sidewalk shoveled. And so that just defers that concept of taking care of yourself and leaves us more in a socialist mindset that somebody else can take care of us because it's not my problem, right? Speak to the hand. And so that's why if you're in Alberta and you got affordable housing, you got low taxes, you have an opportunity then of creating that. Was that gentleman over there was talking about having our kids wanting to stay here because they want to have a family and they want to live here, whether it be in rural Alberta or whether it be in Edmonton. Thank you.
Superb.